So today we are going to finish up our series on forgiveness. We got week 4 over there.
We'll have it all figured out.
Yeah, by the end of today, we'll all be perfect forgivers and never mess up at this forgiveness thing again. Which I guess illustrates the point, doesn't it? Which is that you always
continue to be needed.
This is not one and done, right? This is stuff that we just learn over and over again in new ways until and new opportunities present new challenges. That is what it is to be alive. So last time we were together, we several of my videos didn't work, but hopefully today they will. So yay, we will see. What makes it different from last time? No idea, but I tested. Now, granted, I tested 2 weeks ago and it wasn't working either. So hopefully it will today. So next, we have 2 weeks in front of us. Next week and the following week for this adult forum, and we can do several things. I've got one idea I have that I wanted to run by those of you who are here. Is you may be aware there was an election on Tuesday, and that election is going to be over on Tuesday. So Ohio's going to decide on a variety of important issues, not least issue 1. So I thought with that in the rear view, would it be decent and helpful? Would it be helpful to spend 2 weeks looking at the biblical case for abortion? What does the Bible say, if anything, about abortion? Is that something that is worth our time? And you might know, I can just share this, even as I had presented, my views have changed on that issue, but I'm also extremely, it is not hard for me to get back in the mindset at all of what I used to believe. And I don't disrespect what I used to believe. It is a coherent moral position, even as I've changed my mind. So in other words, if I'm going to present, I'm happy to present, here's what one side of this issue would use to support their arguments. What do you make of it? Here's what another side would use to make their arguments. What do you make of it? So I'm happy to do that. I also am keen to not unnecessarily disturb. I also sense this is a congregation that really isn't, right? Maybe I'm wrong about this, but no one has asked me my opinions on this since coming to Covenant, which is like, fine. I think this is a church that likes to think for itself. There is a diversity of views in our congregation, and I like that about this church. If I were to present 2 weeks on abortion, I would present in that spirit, saying that there is a diversity of views. Well-meaning Christians have disagreed on this for a very long time. We've disagreed about it in some very unique ways over the last 50 years, but it has a history of disagreement over the course of the last 2 millennia, and we can acknowledge that disagreement and acknowledge the diversity of opinions that the church has held. So I am happy to do that. I'm well studied on it and prepared to do much longer than 2 weeks, but I don't know that we have a stomach for a lot longer than 2 weeks. So that's my idea, and I'm happy to do something else. If you'd say, you know what, let's just let that sleeping dog lie. So what do you all think?
My thinking is, after Tuesday, it's already going to be decided.
Yes.
And so, it's like stirring the pot up. And people who have strong feelings, one way or the other, either pro or con, if they don't get their vote, they're going to be upset. And it just is going to be stirring up that upsetness.
No.
So my thinking is, I don't know.
Yes.
What I already have my mind made up.
Yeah. Which I think is probably true for most folks in this church, is my sense. And I'm good with that. I also thought that I could be wrong about this. My sense is a lot of folks who made up their mind probably haven't done, maybe they have, but haven't done so necessarily theologically. Would it be helpful to ask ourselves, how does our faith apply to this important moral issue, which it clearly is a very important moral issue? He's got it. Jack's got it. But not his first rodeo. So that's one vote saying maybe not. Other thoughts?
My thought would be, maybe it would be worthwhile to discuss how to live with the decision.
How to live with the decision.
Whether you
That's
agree with it or not, because it's gonna be hard for one.
Yeah, what I don't want is for anybody, for folks coming to church who feel like some of my friends are spiking the football today, others are, I don't think that would happen here. I just don't sense that here, but I also wouldn't want that to be. It is, it's extreme. It literally involves life and death.
Yeah, definitely, and it could get people very upset.
All right, so I'm hearing maybe no's. Jim?
Is there a Presbyterian church directive or general?
Yeah, I mean, Presbyterian Church has been pro-choice since before Roe v. Wade. So they took a pro-choice stance before Roe v. Wade was a Supreme Court decision. I think it was, I want to say it's 1970. And so, and that pro-choice stance, I believe, was, I can look it up, but it's something to the effect of this decision about whether or not to continue a pregnancy is a careful moral decision that ought to be made between a woman and her doctor without government interference. I believe it's a language like that, which, as I read it, is a staunch, is a pro-choice position.
If I were a better Presbyterian, I would know that already.
Yeah, we don't necessarily talk about what our national views are, and some of that is because it's an interesting dance, right? The national church can say one thing, but local congregations are always allowed to decide the other. Same thing on gay marriage, right? National church decides this in 2014, but until local congregations make their decisions, there is no bishop to enforce the views, so we're still left to make up our own minds. So that's the interesting dance that the local congregations have with their national body. Gene?
I don't know that Tuesday decides it, because we've been back and forth and back and forth.
Sure, it is it's an important milestone, but it won't be over, of course. No matter what happens, it won't be over.
And I think the bigger issue for me as a woman is the right, the privilege to make all my body functions my decision.
Sure.
And it's, as far as, yes, I think we need to continue thinking about it, talking about it, being aware of it, because it grows. This vote is different than just abortion, no abortion. This
Sure.
vote is about health care. This vote is about how a woman who wants to be pregnant has to end a pregnancy because of concerns and dangers, and the timing is such that maybe she will not be permitted to do so, and therefore she will not be able to conceive again. I mean, it's more about healthcare and what we know about healthcare, which we know more today than when I first had my babies. I mean, it's a whole different thing. So yeah, I think we need to continue to keep it with our faith connected to the scripture, so we know what's going on.
Yeah. So maybe I'm wrong. I'm sensing maybe not, and overall, and I'm fine with that, and we'll do something else. Welcome. Bob.
So looking around the room, I think it's unlikely that any of us will be involved personally in making that decision. We're beyond that, basically.
Sure.
On the other end of the spectrum is end of life care and deciding on whether to accept life-extending treatment and for what cost.
Yeah.
And how do you make those decisions? What's moral and immoral? What's the church have to say about those end-of-life decisions?
Right. That'd be another important topic. All right, so we'll do and also if we're going to do this, maybe give people advertising time, maybe even bring in a guest speaker like Rebecca Todd Peters, who's a PCUSA pastor who's written extensively on this issue, and let her come and educate us. All right, good enough. We won't be doing that the next 2 weeks. Everybody grab one of these?
Thanks for offering.
Yeah, no problem. I am keen to not want to, as much as it's stirred the pot. We're at a decent place, it feels like, in terms of church conflict these days. Why mess that up? Very good. Well, let's finish our conversation on forgiveness. Last time we were together, we finished kind of the whole fourfold path. The fourfold path of the forgiveness cycle. Step 1, telling the story. Step 2, naming the hurt. Granting forgiveness. In parentheses, recognizing our shared humanity. And then 4th, renewing or releasing the relationship. Well, today we've got two more things we wanted to address, which is what do we do when we're the one who needs forgiveness? Because we've really been, to this point, looking at this question through the lens of offering it, granting it to other people. What about when we're the one who needs forgiveness? And then secondarily, how we forgive ourselves, which is stuff that we have talked about, but at least a little bit, but I want to address it more directly, even as our book so lovely does. So you'll notice, unsurprisingly, this fourfold path gets translated, but it's the same 4 steps, just translated now towards when we are the one who needs forgiveness instead of the one who's granting it. And anybody ever done this, by the way? Gone to confession? Yeah? Okay, I mean, what was it like? Because I've never, I am astonished at how this scene is replayed for us again and again in movies and TV. There's something about this booth that I've never been to. I don't even think I've seen one in real life. What was it like?
Yeah. Well, when I was much younger, it was like a Catholic grade school, but I would say it was intense and stressful.
Yeah.
It was not relieving.
Okay, it didn't really, yeah.
You didn't feel forgiven when you walked out.
No.
Interesting. Yeah. Because as a young child, I often, I do what we do here, which is confess our sins corporately week to week, and you're my dad, say you're forgiven and do this and all that. And it was meaningful, but like there was something to it, like, yeah, but I'd like to actually unburden myself of the things I've done because they are bothering me. And so I always kind of just fantasized about what would that be like? Maybe it doesn't live up to the billing. I don't know, but I do think there is something about admitting our wrong to another person. So step one, instead of telling the story the way they frame it, when we are the ones in need of forgiveness, is to admit our wrong. When I harm another, whether intentionally or not, I inevitably harm myself. I become less than I am meant to be. I become less than I am capable of being. I oftentimes wonder why it is that my family in particular is full of so many ministers. Some of you got to hear from my dad last week, but of course it was both grandfathers as well. Both great-grandfathers were lay ministers who preached every week but couldn't administer the sacraments, and then of course siblings and cousins and everybody else. What is it about this family that just keeps producing ministers? And I can't point to one specific thing, but one thing that I can say quite clearly, my siblings, we've all talked about this. Growing up, at least in our household, I can't speak for the other generations in my family, didn't grow up in this household, only grew up in mine. My parents were great at doing this towards us as children. I had no problem admitting their wrong to us when they had messed up. I think a lot of pastors' kids struggle with the whole, my parent, usually father, who's a pastor, says one thing in the pulpit, and then I get to see him on Sunday afternoon, and he's somebody different. That was just not true in our family. Because what my dad always pretty much only preached grace. So that meant he'd get up and say, guess what, I really messed up this week, and I'm in need of grace and forgiveness. And you come home and you're like, yep, that's true. What am I going to do, get mad at him for honestly sharing his own flaws with his congregation and with us as children? There was plenty of, ways and weirdness in our family. Believe me, there's plenty of weirdness and unhealth at times. Various stages of significant unhealth, mental illness, a lot of stuff. But this, I often look at, is this what's held us together? The fact that we were modeled again and again by two parents who didn't look for a level of deference or a level of, they wanted our respect, but the way they got it was by doing this. It's one thing to demand respect because of fear, right? I'll punish you if you don't see it my way, or I'll yell at you if you don't see it my way. Okay, I mean, that you can get a certain level of respect, but it won't be a lasting one. That's the kind of respect that lasts exactly as long as your child is as powerful, as long as they are weaker than you. But the moment that your child becomes stronger than you, that respect will die because it was based on their fear of you. And when they don't have to be afraid of you anymore, the respect will go out the window. But if your respect is built on an honest assessment of one's flaws and apologies and a desire to make things better, that's a respect that will last. Admitting the wrong. The tutu's right. Perhaps you've hurt someone close to you and you did not intend to do so. Do you still engage in the fourfold path if you feel justified by what you've done? Ubuntu answers yes. Ubuntu places the highest value on whole and healthy relationships. If someone is hurt, Ubuntu enjoins us to try to understand that person's pain. Ubuntu invites us to see from the other person's perspective. Who remembers what Ubuntu means? It's a hard one. It's all right. We only addressed it, and I had this wonderful video set up to explain it. Let's see if it works this time. Come on, baby. Ubuntu is the African philosophy of what it means to be human.
There's this story from Ghana about, this young girl looking at his father who is peering into the past intensely. And the girl says, Papa, you're always looking at the past. Why? And the father looks at her and says, my daughter, because the answers to the future always reside in the past. And that's where knowledges that are banished in the past, like Ubuntu, become relevant. The word Ubuntu comes from a Southern Nguni word or phrase that says, I am because you are. You are because we are. In other words, as human beings, there's a sense in which there is some connection and interdependence. We rely on each other. Let me start by saying that Ubuntu is not a political program. I also want to add that it is not, a religious, expression. Ubuntu is about our social awareness, a consciousness of the others, a consciousness of the fact that we all have a responsibility to ourselves as human beings, especially the vulnerable among us. But perhaps more importantly, we also have a responsibility to, the world around us, the totality of our environment. Did you know that 30% of food crops in the world need cross-pollination from bees, these tiny insects? So if you are going to destroy the bees from the earth, you are ultimately destroying yourself. So the principle of co-agency implies that we are co-creators. It relies on the recognition that we are interdependent in a balanced biodiversity. So it is that principle of co-agency that Ubuntu encourages. The awareness that our interdependence, that personhood moves beyond the relationship between humans and humans, but a relationship between humans and non-humans, precisely because we are implicated in their lives, and they are implicated in our lives.
That's good. It goes on, but I think that's helpful. So who I am because you are. This is what Ubuntu means. And if that's true, then what the tutus say to us here in this book is that when we've hurt another person, and we think, what I did was the right thing to do. I can tell a story about why I said what I said, why I did what I did, and I stand by both what I said and what I did. You know, well, then why would I apologize to someone? Why would I go through this fourfold path of forgiveness if I was right? And from an individualistic worldview, where what matters most is you and your own individual expression, that makes some sense. If we're all just individuals, you know, interacting with each other, then each individual story, I guess, gets to justify itself. But what they're suggesting is that with Ubuntu, this view of my humanity is inextricably intertwined with you. And not just you, but all of our relationships in this world. Right? Our relationship to the soil, our relationship to the air, our relationship to the animals. All of these things are what make me who I am. Then suddenly, the insistence that I hang on to my story of being right isn't what's most important. It doesn't mean that you have to then say, you know what, everything you did was wrong. But it does mean that when the other person is hurt and my actions or words have caused that hurt, that should matter to me. I should care about that because I care about you. And we're going to stay in dialogue. I will listen to you. Let me hear your hurt. And maybe it's just possible that I am not seeing the whole story. It is possible that something that I said or did, as justified as I feel that it is, may not be as fully justified as I want to insist that it is. So admitting our wrongs when we are in need of forgiveness, so important. Step 2, I think, is even harder. Witnessing the anguish and apologizing. Any of you ever done this thing? And I have done this many times. In my marriage, certainly with my son, boy, have I done this. Where, you know, who's keeping score? But in a debate or an argument, a fight, conflict you've had, I'll own 10%, but you've got 90. This is a 90% you problem, it's a 10% you problem. I'll admit to my 10. So I go away and fight's over and I want to try to make amends. So I come back and I apologize for my 10%. And it's just accepted. Thank you for your apology. Do I just go, great, let's move on? Like, no, now it's time for you to own up to your 90. That's not how this works, right? So our apologies can't be, if they are sincere, if they aren't just rhetorical strategies to get what we want, which is the other person to apologize, then we don't do it in the hopes, the anticipation that then they finally will. Now, I'm sure we've all experienced that when we do honestly own our stuff, whatever that number is, 90, 50, 50, 10, 5, 5, 95, whatever it is, the other person may in fact sincerely respond. But if they don't, that's not the point of seeking forgiveness, right? You're not doing it to get them to apologize as well. Because if that's our motivation, it's not really sincere, is it? We're just looking for them, trying to get them to do what we want them to do. Witnessing the anguish. So if we've admitted our wrong and we share that with another person, they often will hurt, and they will share that hurt with us. Can we bear it? Can we witness it? Victims need to feel that they are being heard and affirmed. The best way to do this is to not argue the facts of their story or the ways they are hurting. Anybody ever had the whole, like, you're in the midst of the apology thing, and when you came home on Tuesday night, actually it's Wednesday, is this helping? Is your need to get the facts right in the situation helping in the path towards reconciliation? Or is this just the ego? Oh, it's just the ego letting your partner know, letting your loved one know that they're not right about everything. Can't remember what day it was, can you? So I guess you don't know everything, do you? Beneath our desire to correct the facts, to make sure they get the story right, is a desire for us to stay in control of the story. You don't even remember what happened. How can you be trusted? You're so foolish. Witnessing the anguish, apologizing without correcting. They've got some great tips in here on how to do that well that I thought were really helpful. but we've all been part of conversations where these things don't happen. Witness the anguish. 1, don't argue. 2, don't cross-examine. 3, listen and acknowledge the harm that you have caused. This is really hard for me. 4, do not justify your actions or your motivations. How many of us have been in situations where we're admitting our wrong and we just think if they could just hear why I did what I did, then they would understand, or they wouldn't be so mad at me. You need to justify what you've done. In fact, don't do the opposite of that. That's nice. Oh, because your boss said this to you. That's all nice. You're still responsible for your actions. So your boss is mean to you that day, and that put you. I was in a bad frame of mind. Okay. This isn't about you at this moment in terms of your justify. This is me being able to share my hurt. Finally, answer all questions honestly and thoroughly. When we apologize sincerely to someone we've hurt, they often will have questions like this. And answer those questions without justifying yourself. Then, if they're asking for your story, you can share it. But don't share it in such a way that you're just kind of quietly bolstering, what I did really was okay. That's not the way to go about this. Witnessing the anguish and apologizing. Asking for forgiveness. Notice that I appreciate the distinction here between 2 and 3. Apologizing isn't the same thing as asking for forgiveness. That's a whole separate step. Sorry, what I did to you was wrong, what I said was wrong. There's no justification for it. I'm sorry. Will you forgive me? That's a whole other step. And isn't it like deeply vulnerable to go from one to the next? Doesn't it feel internally like the step from I'm sorry to those words, will you forgive me? To me, feels like a gulf of vulnerability between steps 2 and 3. That when we ask for forgiveness, now we're fully laid bare. Because they may not. And it's their right to not. And forgiveness can't be forced. Forgiveness must be free. Just like love, if it's forced, it's not forgiveness. They address in their book how sometimes we feel like asking for forgiveness is somehow selfish. That it's to get this off my chest. And I suppose it's possible that in some situations it could be. But I think overall that's another just kind of self-protective strategy. It's a way to not be laid bare. It's not selfish to ask for forgiveness. And in truth, it is the highest form of accountability. By asking for forgiveness, we are committing ourselves to the possibility of change. I do think this is where this book in particular, from a Christian perspective, is so helpful and a needed word to the Christian church. Because Christianity, I think, has actually been decent at outlining all of these steps on forgiveness. But this bit about amends that they talk about here, I don't know that Christians have been always very good at that. This is one thing that our Jewish cousins would say to us regularly. It's like, Christians are weird and maybe even harming people by insisting that you forgive when there have been no amends that have been made by the other person. And they have a point. They have a point. When we ask for forgiveness, part of that is some form of amends. Some form of, is there a way that I can make this right, whatever that means. And that's going to look different from situation to situation. And the person that we're speaking to gets to decide what that making it right looks like. If you've honestly tried and failed in your request for forgiveness, then you have fulfilled your part. But this does not mean that there are not reparations to make. We must always seek to make amends. They describe in the book how, let's say you've stolen some money and the person that you stole from is dead. What does it mean to make amends then? You can make a donation to some worthy cause in that person's name, in the amount that you stole. It's amends, right? It's a way to recognize this hurt And part of the path towards forgiveness, even with someone who can't say those precious words to me, I forgive you, we can still do our part to make things right where we can. Now, there's some hurts, of course, that what can be done. But we can always try. And finally, renewing or releasing the relationship. When we are forgiven, we move forward into a new relationship, but we cannot expect the people that we have hurt to forget that hurt. And we shouldn't expect them to forget. And they shouldn't. I do contend that we talked about this earlier on in the class, that forgetting is the long-term goal of forgiveness. But by long-term, I really mean in the life to come. It does happen here. It does. We've all had good, healthy relationships with people where there was a real hurt, not just a tiny, but like a real hurt. Something truly cruel was said, and while you still, it's like, okay, can I go back and rewind the tape and still remember? Yes, I technically can. So I have not forgotten it, but I can, as best as I am able to. The psalmist says how God takes our sins and puts them behind God's back, or remembers them no more. It's like a willful forgetting. Because this relationship has been restored to such a degree, I base more or less have forgotten. But that's pretty rare. But in the life to come, I still think forgetting has its place. But in this world where we can still be victimized, where we can still be hurt by folks, asking or expecting or even hoping that the other person will forget is probably both unrealistic and it is unfair. So we renew these relationships. Now, let's get to the hardest part, I think. We've talked about this a bit in here. How do we do this? How do we forgive ourselves? Why is this so hard? What makes forgiving ourselves so hard?
We have to admit we've done something that we need to forgive ourselves for.
Yeah, there's an exposing just of the wrongdoing, which is just painful. Right? To be able to admit that I actually have done this, it caused this harm. There is no justification for it. And that's just, again, it's vulnerable, right? It's deeply vulnerable to look at those parts of ourselves and to admit those things about ourselves. Yeah.
We don't think we are
Worthy?
worthy enough.
Yeah. Worthy is a very important word. Very, very important. What are we worthy of? Jim?
I think it's hard to forgive myself unless someone else forgives me first.
Yeah. And I think that there's something to that, right? That it's harder to forgive ourselves when what I've done has harmed this relationship that is still unreconciled. That, right? Because something is, I haven't been able to, I've asked for forgiveness, I've gone through the 4 steps, and the other person hasn't granted it. That becomes harder. Then I still think it's worth pursuing, even in those situations. Because your freedom is worthwhile, even if the other person isn't ready to forgive you. But it's harder. It is easier when the other person has said, Jim, thank you, I love you, and I forgive you. Then that does make it easier. The reasons for forgiving yourself are the same as for forgiving others. It's how we become free of the past. It's how we heal and grow. It's how we make meaning out of our suffering, restore our self-esteem, and tell a new story of who we are. I love the way they talk about reclaiming the story throughout this book, that the forgiveness process is a way, in all of its forms, whether it's of others, ourselves, we're the one. It's always about rewriting that story and taking control of the story, so that what the other person did to you doesn't get to have the final say. Forgiveness is a path that we can undergo where we get to take control of our own narratives again. Same thing with self-forgiveness, where we don't have to be even a victim of the things we've done. But there's grace for us as well. Sometimes I think we resist because we don't want to give ourselves a free pass, right? But self-forgiveness is not a free pass. When we forgive ourselves, we also free ourselves from a cycle of punishment and retribution directed at ourselves. This is not to say that we are not responsible and accountable for our actions. Forgiving myself does not let me off the hook for what I've done. I still must walk the fourfold path and seek to right my wrongs with my victim. As a good Lutheran boy growing up, Luther, before his big conversion, would whip himself for his sins. As a way that this is a medieval form. If you were a monk in the Middle Ages and you wanted to be free from your sins, part of what you do is you punish yourself physically. And that punishment was believed to somehow purge the body and the soul of its sins. And of course, when Luther understands grace for the first time as he's reading Romans, his soul is free for the very first time. But I've often thought, I still carry that legacy, never actually whipped myself. But I carry that with me, a desire to punish myself for what I've done still goes. This is one part that I think is really hard to admit, but I love that they go here. Why is it so difficult to forgive? Perhaps we hold ourselves to a higher standard than the standard to which we hold other people. If we think carefully, we recognize this double standard as a small piece of, arrogance. I'm better than he or she is, so I should have behaved better. I don't know if anybody relates to that one, but when I read that, I was like, get out of my house. Yeah, when we hold ourselves to a higher standard, when we think, I should be better than that, is that not taking a high moral distance? It looks like accountability. It looks like high moral standards, but I think in fact it's a way to say, well, I should be better than you because deep down I think I am better than you. Because you do these things, yes, but not me, not righteous old me. That parable, awesome parable of Luke of the two people praying, and the one is, thank you, God, that I am not like other men. I give a tenth of my money to the poor. I fast twice a day. And then the other person saying, have mercy on me, O God, friends. And Jesus says, only one of these went home justified. So the goal of the moral life for Jesus is not to get to a place where we stop sinning. Actually not the goal, at least not in this life. Because it ain't going to happen. I got an email from someone this last week who said, you talked about us not having free will last week. It didn't really sit well with me. It's not exactly what I said. I went back and looked at it, but I did say, if you think you have such strong free will, try not sin the rest of your life. Let me know how that goes for you. Our will is not as free as we think it is. Doesn't mean our choices don't matter. It certainly doesn't mean that we're robots before God, or that it's all, God's up in heaven pulling the little marionette strings. That's not it. We aren't as free as we think we are. We all are in this together. And by this, I mean a life in which we help each other and hurt each other. And that cycle's not going to end until we die. So self-forgiveness is true acceptance. What that means is that you've come to accept yourself as a flawed human being. Do we expect more from ourselves than God expects from us? We bring our sins to God, and God's like, I know. I know. It's that the whole process of forgiveness with God isn't for God's sake. It's for ours. The forgiveness is already ours, right? So every week there is a way in which when we do this, it's almost play acting. Not hopefully in a harmful way, but it's like, we go through this process of praying a prayer of confession, asking for forgiveness. That forgiveness was already granted before the foundations of the world. But we forget it. So we need to go through it over and over again to remind ourselves, yep, screwed up again. And even if, I don't talk about this enough in church, but I do certainly think this way when it prayer confession isn't also just about you. It's a corporate confession. So if you personally don't relate to, I did this week, that doesn't matter. Did someone in our race do this week? Pretty sure the answer is always going to be a resounding yes. And because of Ubuntu, you are connected to them. They are part of you, and you are part of them. And so we can confess on behalf of our entire species, not just our individual actions.
There's a school of thought out there that says if you can't forgive, well, in order to be able to forgive others, we have to be able to forgive ourselves. And if we can't forgive ourselves, maybe we're holding out on others.
Yeah.
And as you were talking more and more, I was thinking about the whole transactional nature that many of us, including myself, tend toward. Like, you did a thing for me, so I have to do a thing for you.
Yes.
I did a thing for you, so you better do a thing for me. And I think as Christians, we're called to something bigger than that. Not that tit for tat, right for wrong,
Yes.
issue for issue kind of a thing. You know, I think that we're all a part of this big universe, and we all have bad in us, and we all have good in us. And when we don't forgive ourselves, and so then we struggle to forgive others, we make our hearts harder and smaller than they would need to be. And we just, and in that, we bring less of ourselves to the table.
Yes.
And I think in this day and age, more than ever, we need to bring all of our best selves to the table because times are tough. And it's just so important not to, only to how we live and feel about ourselves and our lives, but what we bring.
Thank you. That's beautiful. It reminds me very much of what you just said about Javert in Les Mis. How, like, when he finally, at the end of the novel, the musical, the movie, they're all great. When he finally needs forgiveness and Jean Valjean grants it to him, he ends up committing suicide. Because he can't live in a story where he is indebted to another person. He must be punished by the law, because for him that's the only thing that brings order to this chaotic universe is law and punishment. And Jean Valjean knows of a higher law, right? The law of grace and forgiveness. And your unwillingness to live in this world, it will literally kill you. Right? It's going to kill you. And God wants us to live. Thank you for that. I did want, we got just a minute here, and I do want to show, I love these quotes. I'm only going to read one at the end, but I love this quote by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who gave us the whole stages of grief thing that we've all heard of, all that stuff. But she writes, the most beautiful people we have known are those who have known defeat, known suffering, known struggle, known loss, and have found their way out of the depths. These persons have appreciation, a sensitivity, and understanding of life that fills them with compassion, gentleness, and a deep loving concern. I love this last part. Beautiful people do not just. The most beautiful, compassionate people we have known have suffered greatly. And that suffering has actually made them more human, more compassionate, not less. So, let's watch Kia share. Because to me, she just beautifully exemplifies this point.
I have a question to ask you that, based on something that happened to me, what do you do when the worst thing, or one of the worst things that could possibly happen, does happen? My husband and daughter were killed in the Mumbai terrorist attacks. That's why I went to Mumbai. In 2008. So my world ended, that life ended, and there I was, and I refused to leave the memory of my husband and daughter lying on the floor of that restaurant. So what I chose to do is to gather my strength and take a stand. A stand for what? Forgiveness allowed me to take a stand for the opposite of terrorism. Terrorism destroys life. Terrorists are committed and they're very focused, and they often succeed, unfortunately, in the destruction of life. So who do I choose to be in that case? I choose to affirm life because life is sacred. The life in each and every one of us is sacred. There is a sacred essence that lives beneath all of our differences, all of our flaws and imperfections. All of what's wrong with us, or we think that's wrong with us, there's still a sacred space, which is really pure love. And that, I feel, must be honored in each of us. And if we take a stand for something, we create a powerful field of positive force. And out of that vision and that commitment comes actions in our everyday lives, in small ways and in big ways. I have the opportunity now, because of what happened and the notoriety that it brought me, because these are two Americans that were killed in an international terrorist attack. So I have some big actions I can take, but every single day I have actions I can take. Each one of us do. And that's how we really contribute the most, when we reach inside to that sacred space, which is the pure essence, that love that we are. And we can just bring it forth. And we don't keep it covered up. Terrorists have it totally covered up, completely blocked. And so they're able to kill human beings because they're not connected to them as human beings. But we're not terrorists, or are we? Maybe there are some ways in which we terrorize ourselves or each other through thoughts and words that are harmful in some way. In subtle ways, we could also be terrorists. But we don't have to be. And it's choices that we make from moment to moment. When we're honoring the oneness and sacredness of life in ourselves and in each other, no harm will come to anyone. And so I invite everybody to take that stand with me and to share that with everyone in our world, because we really, truly can make a difference. I really believe that. And I will not sit still anymore. I used to sit still a lot in my life. I spent a lot of time doing nothing. And I cannot sit still anymore, because I believe we can make a difference. Together we have the strength to do anything.
Woo. Beautiful people don't just happen. They grow out of the soil of dead things. That's what soil is. And from that soil is born something beautiful, larger. So I hope that this class has brought something to you that encourages you to want to walk this path towards a larger humanity, where we stop separating ourselves. I love the way that we're not terrorists. What is she doing there? She's lowering the more great moral distance between her and the very people who killed her family. And even though strongly being hurt and denouncing what happened, they're still human beings too. Just human beings who made some really awful decisions. So may you know the power of forgiveness. That is your birthright. You come into this world pre-forgiven, and you will leave this world fully forgiven along the way between then and now, when we learn to live into that forgiveness and bear its fruit.